Okay, good morning, folks, and welcome to the live stream of Coding with Jess. So, as I mentioned on Twitter this morning, we're going to be doing something a little bit different on Coding with Jess. We're going to actually be exploring a brand new framework, a JavaScript framework called RedwoodJS. I've wanted to do something like this for quite a while, and for a couple reasons. One, as I mentioned on Twitter, I've been looking for a framework like Redwood for a while that kind of combines some of the new ideas and technologies that are out there in web development and offers a potential sort of cohesive solution to solving the unique challenges of web development. But the other reason is I want to show on this channel in general, I want to show what the experience is like learning new things as a software developer, especially for someone who's a senior developer. So one of the challenges right now when learning how to be a developer is that you don't have an idea for what it's going to look like 10 years from now. And so a lot of times people that are like first-time developers learning new things, they get discouraged by the amount of Googling they have to do, by the amount of time it takes to learn some of the things that seem to them to be might be pretty simple for somebody who's been doing it for a while. So I've been doing professional software development for like around 15 years, been doing web development for about that long as well. And Redwood is new to me. So I'm curious what that, to kind of highlight what the experience of learning a new technology like Redwood would be for someone who has a history of web development and knows several languages. And so, yeah, we'll just see how that process will hopefully be illuminating to you guys. And right now I'm going to do one quick thing and make sure that the stream is looking good, which I am going to go ahead and close that, which should hopefully free up some bandwidth. Getting some warnings over there. All right. Says the stream's good, so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. Okay, so one thing that will not change from my normal Coding with Jess practices is I'm going to continue to be working in Pomodoros. So even as I'm learning a new thing, I'm going to try and set a timer for 25 minutes. Work on that thing for 25 minutes and then take a 5-minute break, a rest period. I think this is generally good, not just when you're writing code, but also when you're learning new things, when you're writing emails, when you're doing meetings. Having regular breaks can help your brain rest and help you kind of learn and internalize the things that you're learning. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and start a 25-minute timer, and then we will get started learning RedwoodJS. So just as to set the stage here, I have not done any or very, very little pre-reading of RedwoodJS. So I don't have anything prepared right now. So this is, I've dug a little bit into the docs just to know what kind of technologies Redwood is using, but I haven't kind of stacked the deck by going out and spending hours learning Redwood before this. So this is really what it will be like for you, hopefully a realistic experience of coming to a library for the first time and starting to learn it. Okay, so bringing full stack to the Jamstack. So as I mentioned, I've been really interested in the different technologies that are being brought together in Redwood for a couple of reasons. So let's go over to documentation, the introduction. First thing, just whenever you're evaluating new technology, this is sort of a meta comment. The website really does matter, right? So when I'm looking at particular libraries that I want to use to solve a problem, or I'm looking at adopting different technologies, the website needs to look clean, professional. It needs to make sense, and I think that really highlights some of the health of the project in general, and will probably often translates to better code quality and a more active development community. It's going to be generally making that library a better choice, or that framework a better choice. The Redwood website looks really nice. So a couple things that they do really well. One is they kind of give you the high-level features of it that you should be interested in. One of the things that I love that's here is developer experience. Coming from the Ruby and the Ruby on Rails world, Matt's the author of Ruby, famously focused on the developer experience when designing that language. And furthermore, that framework, Ruby on Rails, is known for its friendly developer experience. Certain personalities in the community notwithstanding. So let's see. And then the other thing that they do a great job of is kind of giving you like taking you straight into the code of what it looks like to use some of the key features of RedwoodJS. They even give you a nice little copy button if you wanted to like copy those into a template project you're working on. So let's see. Let's look at those features and see if I can understand what's going on here. So, great. I love this. So they start off with an actual diagram of how everything hangs together. So I mentioned that RedwoodJS is bringing together several different technologies. And so my goal this morning, really in this 2 hours, is to understand how those different technologies fit together. And then probably we'll spend that, like, we'll probably do that for the first hour. It's like, what are these technologies? How do they fit together? And during the second hour, I'll probably be spending more of my time actually trying to stand up a RedwoodJS app, make simple changes, basically do a hello world type example in RedwoodJS, see how long that takes me, see what's frustrating about it. And the cool thing is, as we're learning this is such a new framework and a new community that there's probably going to be chances for us to like give back to the community as well, of like, how can I maybe assist with some documentation for something that I stumbled over when I was trying to get started with it? Or is there like a toolkit or a package or something that I could write that would make it easier for people to kind of get in and get started? Okay, so the Redwood Codebase, I love this. I love block level architectural diagrams. So let's take a look at it here. We've got things divided into the front end and the back end. Pretty typical divide in the modern single page app world. Back in the days of Ruby on Rails, when you had more monolithic application or monolithic code bases that were providing they usually provided both the front end and back end, and you actually had to be thoughtful about like, okay, I'm in this Ruby on Rails code base. Am I doing something on the front end or the back end or the in between end? Things weren't so clean back then. It's fine that was the way things were. It's nice now that we kind of had this divide and we can think of things very clearly as the back end and front end. Because frankly, that confusion with things like PHP and older languages where they don't have a clear distinction between front end and back end could lead to doing some things on the front end that you should never have done on the front end, and doing things on the back end that you maybe not have should have done there either. So anyway, love this divide. Starts with the front end and back end. So the back end, let's start with the back end. So the Redwood Codebase, they have this /API. So I'm gathering that they're going to have an API endpoint that's going to be hosted up by the backend, and it's probably going to be hosted at /API. And inside that API endpoint, there's a couple things that are powering it. So one, they're using GraphQL. So right off the bat, you should know, here's the communication framework for the networking framework or whatever for the front end to communicate with it. It's going to be GraphQL. The next thing is the DB schema. They see that as living within the API as well, which is interesting to like think about in terms of like the API and the DB schema being very close to one another. This is one of the things that I was just reading an article this morning about how when we map our DB schema directly to things like our API, that can potentially cause problems. Now, this is actually one of the coolest things about Prisma and GraphQL and sort of like this new backend stack that we're going to be exploring today, is it does create this automatic mapping very similar to what the ORM in Rails back like when we had Active Record that came along. We used to have to, by the way, before ORMs, we had to write a bunch of database connectivity code that was like boilerplate code, took forever to write. That was kind of my world before I came to Rails. And it turns out that we can do better than that. And so the ORM layer, while that did cause problems, and if you want to go look at Hacker News right now and look at one of the top articles, you can read about some of the problems that those ORM layers can lead to. It led to a tremendous boost in productivity. And similarly, tying the DB schema in with the API endpoints and the way that Prisma kind of merges those together goes a step further in taking more code, more boilerplate code that you've had to write off your plate. I imagine it's also going to lead to some problems, right? Everything in software architecture is a trade-off. It's a trade-off decision that you're having to make. And so the trade-off that they've made here is they're choosing to to marry that schema along with the API. And again, this is the Prisma choice. This Redwood is just using Prisma. So that's something that we're going to like dive into a little bit further. And then third-party API. I'm looking at, I don't know what that means. Services, I don't know what that means exactly yet. That could mean a variety of things, so we'll go figure that out. So the code base then goes through, they've got this layer here. So this is not only an architectural diagram, but a time-based diagram. As you're writing in your code base, it's going to go through a build process. That build is going to generate some things. Here are the things that it's going to generate. A set of serverless functions. One of those functions is going to be your GraphQL endpoint. So basically, it's going to take your entire backend, DB schema. This is as far as I understand it, right? Like, I haven't read the docs yet. Like, I'm just trying to put these different ideas together in one. But what it's going to do is take your entire backend and turn that into a set of functions that are going to run and be deployed in like a serverless Jamstack, they call it. Again, not something I'm super familiar with, but something I've read a little bit about. Environment. And one of those functions is going to encapsulate basically all of your routing effectively, like your API. Well, not routing, because routing happens on the front end. I misspoke there. So we'll talk about routing in a second. But your entire API is going to be as a single GraphQL endpoint. And then all of the individual functions are also going to be running as serverless functions. So I imagine that's probably where this services piece comes in. Maybe even the third-party API. Yeah, we'll see. We'll see. But I'm guessing the services end up getting converted into custom functions, which run in the serverless manner as well. Okay, so continuing down to the bottom, to the front end. Let's look through this stuff. So components, cells, forms, styles. Okay, so components is probably referring primarily to React, right? React is a way of organizing your front-end code using components and having those components do a lot of fancy things with like state and other things that you need to do when you have a single-page application development environment. So it's not the same thing. Instead of just generating some HTML that you just throw up on the page and then overlaying some JavaScript on top of that, which is the old jQuery model. The React model is you have an entire basically rendering engine in the front end that consists of these components that have state associated with them, and that is continually updating in this sort of single page app world. Cells and forms, I noticed when I was scrolling through the homepage that those were two of the things that were on the page. Cells, forms. Oh look, there's services as well. I don't know what cells are yet. I don't know what forms are. I can guess at what forms are. I don't know what cells are yet, so we'll come back to that one once we've had a little chance to dig in. Forms, however, to interact with, and there's one of the things that Ruby on Rails was nice about it is that a lot of different forms libraries came out to help you generate those forms automatically on the front end based on the data that was coming from the back end. And that like cut down on a lot of boilerplate code, but you end up having to write a lot of boilerplate code when you're writing forms, and a lot of web applications is actually manipulating forms, even though it may not look like that to the end user, right? It's submitting the data back to the back end, and that interaction requires a form model. That's the way that HTML works. That's the way it submits HTML, and yeah, we can also talk about JavaScript submits and things like that. Okay, so moving on. Styles, I would imagine that any opinionated web framework is going to have some opinion about styles. I love that they have ... there. That makes me wonder why they have that. Is there more stuff in web? Have they not decided on styles? I read a little bit about like what they're thinking about styles, and I think that's one of the things that's like an open question in Redwood that they haven't settled on yet. So that'll be interesting. So that'll also go through a Webpack powered build using a Jamstack style approach, which will then generate your HTML and your code split chunks.js. So I imagine that that's basically saying, you know, the Webpacker will turn this into an optimal set of resources that will then get served up so that when a user interacts with the website, you can actually grab, they actually grab just the resources that they need, and there's the star, download it as needed, right? So ideally, this would all, it would be an optimal loading experience. And I know that that's something that has to be tuned over time. I wouldn't expect that's something that like Redwood has already solved, but we'll see. And then finally, all those files are served up by a Jamstack CDN, which is basically a fancy way of saying that we serve them up very quickly to the user in a way that is relative to that user's location. So there's a quick walkthrough of this architecture diagram. This is great because for me as a visual person, I'm a visual learner. This has already given me a lot of, basically like almost like a map of where I can hang the different concepts that I'm going to come into contact with today on Redwood in these different little areas. So should be fun. All right, so we are diving in a little bit further. That tells me how it's organized /web. I imagine that might even have some impact on the way that the repo is organized when I get my own little RedwoodJS app set up. So I'll be kind of looking for that in terms of the code organization, which they mentioned right here, a predefined place for all of your code, front end and back end. I'm guessing that that's probably in a web folder and an API folder, but we'll see. All right, routing. So Redwood featured its own router that brings some awesome innovation. You know what? I don't really care. Cells on the other end, sequence of retrieving data from an API, showing a loading placeholder, then displaying it. Let me move our Pomodoro over here to the right, just so I can kind of keep in mind how much time we have left before our break. The sequence of retrieving data from the API, showing a loading placeholder, and then displaying the result is so common that they codify it into a declarative code pattern, resulting in simple and readable code. We call them cells, and they contain the GraphQL query, the loading, empty, error, and success states, each one rendering itself automatically depending on which state your cell's in. Interesting. So this is going to be, so this is a Redwood concept that we're going to have to really dig into. Routing, frankly, I'm just not that interested in routing, but this piece, this is going to be how we flow from the front end to the back end and back up to the front end. There's probably going to be something along the lines of state encoded in here as well. We've got these different states, and even the rendering showing a loading placeholder. Like there's a lot loaded in cells, so we're definitely going to want to make sure that we spend some time understanding what these are and how these sort of put together the building blocks of GraphQL, Prisma, Apollo, and React all together into like this cohesive, like they call it, a sequence. So yeah, this is going to be a big thing to dig into. I'm very curious to see where they're going there. Services. So this is one of the things I was going through the data diagram that I said I don't know what they mean by that. They could mean a whole variety of things. So business logic, effectively. Okay. These can be used by your GraphQL API or any other place in your backend code. They do Redwood code. Redwood does all the annoying stuff for me. Man, that's so great. Actually, I'm running out of coffee. Redwood, can you help me? That's quite the statement, guys. Redwood's doing all the all the annoying stuff. Check out how easy it is to create and consume a GraphQL endpoint. We didn't even omit any import statements or get the sheet on the code. All right, so what they're saying, services. So do they want me to expose my GraphQL endpoints as services? Okay, what is this thing actually doing? User find many users. So this is kind of funny. It's a funny example because I would have expected, when I came to this and I saw services, what I was expecting was, like they talked about, business logic. So what I'm thinking there is my application needs to do some things beyond just retrieving some things, right? So GraphQL, REST, these are ways to retrieve data, but they're also ways to tell the backend application like what needs to happen with the app. So I would have expected services to be something along the lines of like things you need to do, but this example is maybe because it's a find many. It just feels like retrieving data. Like I would have thought, just to jump to the point, I would have thought that Prisma would have handled this for me. I'm not a Prisma expert, so I don't know why Prisma doesn't handle this for me, but we're going to go find out. Maybe they just chose a simplified example to show how easy it is to create the whole thing, but it's not actually a good example. It's not necessarily the prescribed use case for services. I don't know. I would love for that use case to be more clear there, but that's fine. Generators. Yeah. The relentless elimination of boilerplate sounds like a good thing. I'm feeling so good right now. Redwood files still need a bit of code to get you started. Absolutely agree. We have scaffold generators. So this is probably, I know that Tom Preston Warner, who is one of the early guys at GitHub and has been, instrumental in the Ruby and Rails community for a while. Rails has really nice generators. And a lot of times, some of them are definitely for beginners. And after you've been a Rails developer for a while, you don't use those beginner set of generators. But there's some generators that are just so freaking useful that I use them all the time, even though I've been writing Rails for a long time. So the fact that there are generators makes me super happy and makes me think that the developer experience, as they highlight here, is actually going to be slick. And I'm so excited. All right, forms. I already talked about forms a little bit and how painful they are. I'm excited to see what the Redwood solution is. Okay, so that's the stuff that they're selling me. It's going to be like routing and cells and services and generators and forms. Mildly excited. I mean, more than mildly excited. Mildly confused, but very excited. So I think at this point, I'm kind of done reading at this point. I need to like play with stuff in order to learn. Like I'm one of those, like, I need to manipulate the thing. I need the ideas first. So here's my ideas. Like I got it. I got how it hangs together. I know that there's these technologies. I'm not an expert in any of these technologies, but let's see how they actually work together. So let's see where we go here. Introduction. Yep, it's still an alpha. All right, examples. I definitely would. I don't really want to look at examples. Like I want to try to build something and then Redwood philosophy. I don't really care. I'll come back to the philosophy at some point. How it works. I feel like I've already been able to deduce that from their graphic, which is great. So I'm not going to dig into that section. How can it be serverless if it involves a GraphQL API? I don't really care about how it solves the problem. All right, assets and files. We're going to be stored in a CDN. I kind of know that. The development server is going to be Webpack. Ooh. Okay, this is telling me a little bit about code organization, which is cool. It's going to store the rendered stuff in public. Asset imports, I'll come back to that. So as you can probably tell by the way I'm browsing the docs right now, I'm quickly losing my patience for like reading and needing to get to like doing. So I'm probably going to jump down to this big block called tutorial here in just a second, but I do want to like finish browsing this little introduction section to see if there's anything that might save us pain down the road. Publishing, so monorepo, published via, all right. The Redwood command line. I'm excited about having a command line tool there as well. This should be cool. And Redwood form provides several helpers to make your life easier when working with forms. Like I said, we're going to come to this when we actually start writing something. And then the Redwood router, again, routing is a necessary evil. We'll figure out how it works once we actually have routes that we need to make. Okay, I'm done. Documentation, cool. Now, yeah, so we're roughly 20 minutes into learning RedwoodJS now, and I think it's time to start playing with something. That is plenty of time to like go dig around without actually writing code. Okay, so how do we get started? Tutorial, welcome to Redwood. I've already checked out, well, I haven't technically read the README. So the README in GitHub is here. Make things a little bit bigger to make it easier for you to read. Looks like it's largely reiterating what I've already read in the website. So yeah, we're good. In this tutorial, we're going to build a blog engine. Oh, blog engine. How many blog engines have I built? In reality, a blog is probably not the ideal candidate. Yeah, we'll do it. Let's go. I was debating for a moment whether I wanted to come up with my own example, but I think following the tutorial will actually be helpful. It assumes that I'm familiar with a few core concepts. I am familiar. I am not an expert. Just to be clear, I am not an expert in React or GraphQL or Jamstack. I have been on teams that I've been the engineering manager of teams that shipped React applications with GraphQL APIs. I've never deployed a production Jamstack application in production. So yeah, this stuff is new-ish to me, although I'm familiar with the concepts. So yeah, we'll see how it goes. Node and Yarn. All right, let's see how am I set up, or do I have to install stuffs? Yarn dash version. Cool. I think I'm using ASDF. I am, and I have Node.js 12.13.1, and it just has to be greater than 12. So we should be good there. All right, so I'm going to go create a new folder in my code folder. Redwood blog, cd Redwood blog. All right, and let's see. Please do upgrade accordingly. Done. I love that. By the way, this is really nice. For people who are coming to Redwood for the first time and aren't familiar with Yarn and Node, I love that they actually have a, hey, if you're a Mac user, follow these instructions. If you're a Windows user, follow these instructions. Just that really helps people, like makes it really truly beginner friendly, or helps to make it beginner friendly. So good job, y'all. Installing and starting development. We use Yarn. Yarn's a requirement. Okay. Oh, I think I can just create it in dot. So this is using yarn and saying, wait, what? Yarn create Redwood app. All right. And we'll do it in this directory that I've already created. So I'm not an expert in yarn. I don't actually know what this does. Yarn create. Error, command failed. All right, since I don't understand the yarn create command, I'm going to remove Redwood blog and I'm going to run it exactly as they have mentioned here. I imagine this creates a new yarn application that has nothing to do with React or Redwood, but maybe yarn create Redwood blog is like maybe this Redwood dash. No way. Redwood app. Feel like this is trying to do something fancy, but I don't know what's going to be happening here. Creating Redwood app. Downloading latest release. Extracting latest release. Well, dang if I had no idea. I'm going to Google. So while this is working, I want to go Google yarn create real quick because I have not used that before. So yarn create. Yeah, sure enough. You can like define a starter kit package and basically, I guess, send it up to like the... Cool. I have never used that. Huh. Starter kit projects. See, I've used create React app, but I've never used it via this command, yarn create. That's pretty slick. All right, so you can publish these started. So this is going to be running a generator very similar to create React app. So now we've got a new directory called Redwood blog. Let's go see what's in it. I'm going to be using VS Code today to walk through all the things. So let's see. Sure enough, as we predicted, we've got our API directory, our web directory, and then we also have node modules where most of our code is going to be stored, or actually, sorry, node npm packages are going to be stored. Very cool. Might vaguely interested in package.json here. Interesting. Okay. That is 25 minutes. So we're 25 minutes into learning good old RedwoodJS. So we're going to take a break real quick and be back in 5 minutes and continue digging in here. So be back in 5. All right, we're back again to learn some more RedwoodJS. So let me go ahead and start the next timer, and we'll spend another 25 minutes going at it, and then see where we get then. All right, we're back again. There we go. Okay, so one of the things I mentioned briefly in the last when I got started with the live stream is that like learning new things can be intimidating. And I just wanted to comment that it's no less intimidating when you're a senior developer. You've just done it more often. And so you're more familiar with the feeling of, oh my gosh, am I going to be able to do this? And so you can kind of like let that feeling come and then let that feeling go. So here we are. I'm learning a bunch of new stuff today, and it's going to be fun. But it is still an intimidating prospect to learn, maybe even more so while everyone's watching, but it's still an intimidating process to learn. So don't fault yourself for that. Okay, so let's see. We were at the beginning of the tutorial where we have created our first Redwood application. We've seeded into the Redwood blog directory, and now we want to just start the dev server. Start her up. All right, so let's see how that goes. Yarn Redwood dev. Oh, all right. A lot of stuff happening here. So generating the Prisma client. Okay, so that would be basically looking at our database layer and generating the Prisma layer that is going to be able to respond to GraphQL endpoints and serve up certain things from our data layer. So interesting. Webpack output is being served from / project is running locally at 8910, or as they cutely put out in the documentation, 8910. Content not from Webpack is served from web. Content not from Webpack. Interesting. 404s will fall back to index.html. So there's a static index.html that will be served up in the case of 404s. Cool. So we got the application running. I'm going to open a new terminal real quick so that I can leave the application running, and let's continue on with the tutorial. So let's see. Next, it says a browser should open automatically, and you'll see the welcome page. Yep. Remember, the port number is as easy as counting 8, 9, 10. Let's do the first commit. Yeah, let's go ahead and make this a Git repository. That's fine. Add dot git commit. Boom. Oh. Cool. All right, so we now have the first commit up. Let's go on to the next page. What do we have next? Page not found. Oh man, looks like they're. Oh no, is Redwood? Whoa, bad timing. It looks like the tutorial is actually down. Okay, so presumably that entire tutorial will be available on Redwood's, on their actual website. So let's go there and that is definitely unfortunate timing, but hopefully public website. All right, so this public website should do it. I'm going to keep that. I'm guessing that's like a temporary outage thing. I'll just let them know just in case they don't have a uptime monitoring or something built on that. Yeah, looks like the entire site is down, at least for me. Let me see if it's a caching issue. Open a new incognito. Okay. All right, so let them know. Hopefully that's helpful. Maybe it'll be back in just a second. Kind of ironic timing, but we're gonna go through the tutorial, and we can do that through their actual GitHub repo. We don't have to use the website. The website would be a lot nicer. So let's see, publish. Let's see if we can figure out our way through here. So just a few seconds ago, I'm gonna just search for yarn create in here. There it is, yarn create. There it is, tutorial.md. Cool. All right, it looks like, judging on the size of this scroll bar, this is actually the entire tutorial. So we can go pick it up right from here. Let's see. So git init, git commit, done. Redwood file structure. I was already talking a little bit about this file structure. API Prisma. So we can jump over to VS Code and kind of look at this ourselves. But API Prisma source functions GraphQL services. Okay, interesting. And then interesting. Okay, just comparing. They've got schema and seeds, function GraphQL services. Okay, great. And then they have some configuration files, or we have some configuration files here. Interesting. So layered package JSONs, which makes sense because Redwood is built on a whole host of JavaScript technologies, not just, and each one of those is probably going to need its own package. Oh, interesting. So they've split the RedwoodJS. This is similar to something that Rails did. They split out Active Record and all those other things into different gems. And yeah, looks like they're doing something similar here, splitting these into different NPM packages. All right, so GraphQL, services and functions. Already has a file here. Let's make this a little bigger. Create GraphQL handler, make merge schema. Looks like some methods that are getting called to generate the GraphQL layer, maybe? Oh, I bet this is the part that I was talking about, how GraphQL, the GraphQL layer becomes a serverless function. It's like one of the serverless functions that end up running there. Okay, fair enough, fair enough. So web, public, source, kind of the other organization stuff. Again, let's get into actually using it. API directory and web directory, we've already talked about that. Redwood separates the backend into their own paths and refers to them as workspaces. And that's what I was noting, that there's two sets of package JSON files, one at API and one at web here. So I guess those are the Yarn workspaces. Not something I'm super familiar with in the Yarn world, or in the JavaScript world, but that, I think that makes a lot of sense. Gotcha. Yeah, Yarn workspace, web, add, marked. Okay, so if you wanted to add if you want to use Yarn to add an NPM package to one of those package JSONs, you can use these workspace delineations to basically route to one of the package JSON files. Cool. Again, they're walking me through the code organization. I kind of want to get to building stuff, so I'm gonna just skip over this. Know that I can come back to it. I think we've roughly deduced most of these things from just reading through. So let's get to actually doing stuff. Our first page. Let's give users something to look at besides the welcome page. I agree. We'll use the Redwood command line tool to create a page for us. So yarn Redwood generate page home / Okay, so that does, what do all these args do? So yarn Redwood generate, that's our fancy generators that I'm so excited about. I would imagine I could eventually map this yarn Redwood command to something like R. So I could type like R generate, which would be really nice, or RG would be even better. Let's actually do something real quick. Yarn Redwood help. Okay, cool. So this gives us a little bit of a tour of the Redwood command line tool, generate being one of the options. Alias is G. Boom! I had called that one. All right, Yarn Redwood G will give us that. And then eventually what we can do is I'll add an alias to my aliases file that allows me to say RG, which will be a shortcut for Yarn Redwood. Anyway, that'll make it just shorter to type out all these commands. But for now, it's nice to type them out all the way just so you remember what you're doing. Creates web. So this is going to create web / source / pages / homepage / homepage.js. Okay, let's see this. Let's see this thing actually in action. Yarn Redwood generate page home / that is a long freaking command. Okay, and it's generating, this is the type. I don't know if you guys see this, generate type here. So that first command line arg after generate is the type. This is probably the name, and this is probably the route, I'm guessing, / but we'll try it. We'll see what happens. All right, so now one of the nice things is we have git, everything's stored in git, so I can see the diff. So this, what did it do? It modified the routes.js file and added a route called home page homepage. I didn't tell it it was called homepage. I guess they append like camel case page to every page. I'm kind of tempted to like generate another page now just to see if that's what is actually going on, but we'll figure that out. And then they've got some untracked files, a whole set of untracked files under web source pages homepage. So we can go, I'll use VS Code just as a friendlier way of browsing down there. So under pages, we've got now a new directory called homepage that has homepage.js in it, which this may look familiar to you who are familiar with React. This sure looks like a React component that's returning some JSX to me. Maybe that's not what it is. One of the things that's immediately strange to me is I don't see any imports here, which kind of hurts my head. I'm just used to jumping into a JavaScript React file or whatever, any JavaScript file in any project and seeing a ton of imports at the top. So clearly they're doing some voodoo here that I am not familiar with, but I applaud, 100% applaud. And then homepage test, nice. So right out of the box, it gives you a test that is affiliated or associated with that homepage component that just got generated. And looks like it's using React testing library, which is fantastic. Thanks, Kent, for all your work there. And yeah, this is a pretty standard, like, make sure the thing actually renders and you don't have any like terrible, almost like syntax errors. So this is a useful test, but it is not the most useful test. And if you're curious about like testing frameworks and philosophy around that, I definitely recommend Kent's testingjavascript.com for kind of thinking about how to write better tests for your components. But that's really cool. Homepage test. So great. So 3 files were generated. Well, 1 file was modified, added a route to my routes file. This routes file feels delightfully familiar to me coming from Rails, where there's a single route file that controls everything. So I'm going to definitely want to dig in there and understand what's going on. And then it adds this stuff in web source pages, which to me just makes a ton of sense. It's like everything is a page. Unfortunately, like single page app world, the idea of pages has been deprecated or downgraded. I say downgraded is a better word, in favor of things like components and stuff like that. So sometimes it's difficult, even though the user, most of the time the user experiences your application in terms of pages, or at least pages with consistent fixed navigation. Like that UI concept still exists, and is pretty familiar. The single page app has made it harder to tell what are the pages. So I like that they're going back to this kind of like page oriented view of the world. It could also be because I'm familiar with doing web development before the single page app revolution. And that was something that was, just default. Everything was like a .html that was a page. So, all right. So now we should be able to go to / and yeah, there, boom, it's already updated. Just to remember what was in this browser a moment ago, the welcome page, and what's in it now, this new homepage thing. Find me and where to find me. So one of the things that is definitely going on here is this server is, as it's live updating, it's doing some sort of live update to the browser too. This is also JavaScript magic to me. I love it when it happens, where I can like make changes to a source file, save the source file, and then the page immediately reloads with like the results of that save. Super freaking cool. I don't know how it works. Maybe one day on Coding with Jess, we'll go dig in and find out. Looks like the website's still down. Hope those guys get on top of that. All right, it's not pretty, but it's a start. Open the page in your editor. Let's change some text and save. And your browser should automatically reload with your new text. I mean, I know that that's like old hat to most of you who've been doing development, but for someone who like had to live through like 30-second or longer loops of making changes and then seeing those changes in the browser, it's freaking magical. Like, that is so cool. So magic refresh, and then sparkles, because we need more emojis in life in general. Save. Boom. I'll never get tired of that. I'm fairly certain I will never get tired of that. That is so fun. All right. Enough geekery with that. What's next? So routing. Open up web sources routes and take a look at the route that was created. try changing the route to something like hello. All right, let's do that. MP, let's open up our routes file. We already looked at this in the command line to kind of see what things are going on here. Okay, so homepage, I'm guessing is referring to the component, right? So that's going to be referring to the object here, which is by default in pages/homepage. Okay, and then notice that there's this not found page, right? That's this. That is the 404. Interesting. I would have expected that to be an index.html. I'm a little confused by that. Oh, maybe the index.html page is actually serving up a JavaScript component? Maybe. Okay, something earlier on in the tutorial is throwing me off a little bit here, but saying like when 404s happen, index.html will be loaded. I'm wondering how that interacts with this thing called not found page, which is a component, but we'll get back to that later, I suppose. So here's routes again. So there's two routes here. When things are not found, which I would guess that's a 404. I wonder if that maps to a status code. So other things now I'm thinking is like, as I'm looking at this, is how are different HTTP status codes handled? Does this return a 404? How does it know when a route's not found? Okay, so probably the router itself informs. The router itself takes the incoming request, knows whether something has been found or not, and then this is like a specially delineated route for not found, which returns this component. Again, that spot in the 404, where is it? In the documentation seems confusing. Oh, that maybe that was in. Where did I see that? I'm not able to Google for it now. I swear that was in here. Crazy. All right, I don't know when it is. I may go back and watch my own video to find out where I got misled there around the 404 thing. All right, spending too much time on that. Let's keep going. I think it's pretty clear how routing works here. This is super clean. I love this. They wanted us to change a couple things here just to like get familiar with it. So we'll change this to home, and now we'll go here, and there's the 404 not found. Just for fun here, let's go to not found page, and we'll do a shrug emoji. And a guy and a girl both shrugging. And there they are. So, all right, so 404, as suspected, like this not found page component is loading when the router fails to find a path. So now we can actually go over here to our browser and go to /home, which takes us to our home component. Cool. Dude, this is so far, like, man, this is nice. It feels really good. Like, very, very clean. Notice there's not a I think in the tutorial they said we've relentlessly eliminated boilerplate. Even these files feel like the files that are generated, the files that I'm editing feel really, it feels really clear to me what most things are doing in the file, which is really good for boilerplate and that kind of stuff. And also there's like handy little comments up here. Again, something I used to do. I mean, if you want it to look even cleaner, you can nuke those comments and just know that, hey, the tutorial and the docs are always there for you. Well, except for when the website's down. Just kidding. All right, so let's create a second page and a link. So again, we're back to our little generator command. Yarn. Actually, let me do, I'm going to go ahead and add dot and then get the status. Those are the three things we looked at. Adding homepage. I don't have a remote set up yet. That's fine. So yarn Redwood G, because I can, and page about. Matt Spector says very Next.js-y so far. Wouldn't know. Never played with Next.js. Not surprised that it's Next.js-y at all, given that Tom is on the board at the place that hosts Next. What am I thinking of here? Somebody will give me the name. The name of the company that is behind Next.js. and that has a great deployment solution that's a competitor. Netlify, there we go. Bam, I don't know why that took so long. All right, so yeah, NetSupplies. There's definitely some relationships between Netlify, Next.js, RedwoodJS, the people who are all working on that. Zeit, sorry. Oh my gosh, sorry Netlify, sorry Zeit. It's Zeit. That's the one that has the. Thanks, Matt. Good to see you again, Lewis. All right, so Yarn Redwood G page about. So we're going to generate a new page here. All right, similar. We've already seen this command. We know what it's going to generate. It's going to generate a component called about page, which is in web sources pages. It's also going to generate what? A test file along with that, so that we have like our little default test to make sure that that component renders successfully, and it's going to add something to our routes file. And this one's called about. And as predicted, they're using this page mnemonic, or not mnemonic, like naming scheme. To basically, anytime I create something with the generator that is of page type, they append page to it. Like I said, I really like that, in that it makes it really explicit when a component is intended to represent a page and when you can route directly to it. Again, I think that's a concept that has been lost in the single page app realm, and maybe that's a concept they're borrowing, to Matt's point, from Next.js. It could be. I'm a huge fan of frameworks like learning from one another and borrowing great ideas from other frameworks. All right, so what do they want us to do here? We've created an about page. Notice that we didn't specify a route this time. If you leave it off, it will create it and give it a path that's the same as the page name. Oh, I didn't notice that as I was typing the command, but yeah. Okay, so now this is at /about. Again, that is the most beautiful kind of what is it? Configuration over. Anyway, that's like the fact that was automatic and is unsurprising is actually really, really great. Or convention, that's what I was going to say. That's one of those great examples of convention over configuration, of the fact that it just does that, and that I'm not at all surprised that it did what it did. So by convention, they'll go ahead and name it the same thing. So about should show our new page. It should indeed, but it will look pretty boring and similar to the home page, except it's called about page. No one's going to find it manually changing the URL, so let's add a link. All right. How are links handled? So this is the other part of routing in the single page app world. Let's see how they have made that nice in the or what kind of approach they're taking here for linking. Okay, so they want me to go to the homepage component. Let's do that. I'm going to throw this over here on the left. Throw this on the right, or on the right, I should say. And then totally forgetting my hotkeys this morning on how to hide and show the Explorer. There we go. I'll just click it for now. If anybody remembers the keyboard shortcut for hide and show the left bar in VS Code, feel free to drop it in chat, because I've forgotten it this morning. Let's see. So let's open the home page. Here is our fancy. So I need to import a function called link. And I could easily copy this stuff from the thing on the left, but I find that when I'm learning something, it's just as important to get it into my fingers as it is to get it into my head. And so I tend to type everything out when I'm learning, just as a way of kind of getting my fingers familiar with with what's being done. And then it'll flow out of my fingers more easily in the future, is the hope. Maybe it won't. Okay, so let's see a couple things they're doing here, and let's just call them out as we're going through. They've got this empty div. I even said div. Empty HTML element here, which I actually don't know what that does. So if anybody wanted to point me toward docs on what that does, I would guess that is basically saying wrap everything in here. I think this is the new JSX way of like letting you return multiple items, HTML elements at the same level. So you used to not be able to do that. You used to have to wrap everything in a div. I think this is like a newish way of allowing you to do that. So for example, if you look over here on the right, they've got a header and a main element, and they have them at the same level. JSX back in the day was like, nope, you can only return a single HTML element, and that would have counted as two HTML elements side by side. So if you wanted them at the same level, you had to like wrap them in a div. I guess this is just a shorthand way of doing that without having to clutter up your, and I would imagine probably it removes it. These are pure guesses here, but I would imagine it probably removes it from your HTML as well. Holy smokes, we've already been going for 25 minutes. Okay, so it's as good a time as any to take a break. We are now about 1 hour into learning RedwoodJS, and we're kind of going through the tutorial step by step. Yeah, I'm going to take a 5-minute break, and we'll be back to continue kind of plowing through this tutorial and learning more about this framework. So far, it is really nice. Like they talked about, one of their principles, their main selling points for RedwoodJS is a great developer experience. And so far, I would have to agree. The development experience is pretty fantastic. So I will see you guys in about 5 minutes, and we'll keep going. All right, we're coming up on the end of our Pomodoro break, and I'm excited to get back into learning Redwood. So we are about 1 hour in. For those of you who are just joining us, we're about 1 hour into learning RedwoodJS. We're going through the Redwood tutorial. So far, it's been a great experience. We've been messing around with React on the front end, and we are now about to just keep going. So we were just looking into how Redwood handles linking on the front end. Again, this is probably going to be something that's pretty standard in React, but we're going to see what sort of convention that they've adopted and how that interacts with their router. So we had to import links or link as a function and routes from the RedwoodJS router, and we'll see how that works here. So they want us to restructure the homepage by adding a header and a main section. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this piece into our header and add a main. And then we've got our H1, right? The whole tutorial is about making a blog. So this is going to be the Redwood blog. And then we have a nav element that's also here. And big surprise, that nav element has an unordered list in it, which has list items in it. No surprise there. And then we have a link in this nav section. Go ahead and take that out, that content out. And okay, so this is a link component. It's got a 2 parameter that goes routes, and now we're pulling from this routes function here, which is giving me routes.about, which seems pretty nice. And then I can just put the word about. Okay, so we need to go over to our routes file again and figure out how it is picking up there. So that's routes name about. I'm guessing it's using this name to identify which route we want to route to, using that and generate this function signature here. So let's see how that works. I would imagine pretty well. Great, so now our Redwood blog has a simple navigation and an about, and I can click about and it takes us to the about page. Very cool. That was super clean. Basically, so we reformatted the HTML as a result of this change to make it a little cleaner, but really to add a link, all we had to do is do this import here, import the routes, and then this simple probably 15-20 characters or so, and then pulling from the router the exact page that we want to use. Cool. I don't actually know if Redwood uses like an off-the-shelf router or that behind the scenes, or whether they've written all this from scratch. Seems really nice to me relative to the routing work that I've done in React, which was primarily in React Native. Which React Native routing is a whole nother ball of wax. Redwood loves function components. Yes, clearly this is a functional component style in React. So we'll make extensive use of React hooks as we go. Cool. Not something I've had a chance to play with yet. So those came out at React Conf 2018, I believe, is when those were announced. I remember Dan Abramov's like live coding, showing them off on stage, which was super cool. But yeah, so those were announced, but I haven't had a chance to play with them since they launched. So this will be a fun opportunity. You're free to use class components, but we recommend avoiding them unless you need their special capabilities. Gotcha. Yeah. All right. Link tag, it takes a single to attribute. It calls a named route function. The function has the same name as the name attribute. Great. So what we surmised as we were looking at it is actually true, and they've confirmed it in the docs, which is great. By the way, like learning hack, try to figure out what the thing is doing before you go read the docs to see how it's doing it. That learning technique is called generation, where you actually try to answer a question before you've ever known what the answer was. It's a much more powerful learning technique than just reading what the answer is. Because it forces you to kind of like think through and conceptualize the different things there. So anyway, try to answer the question without looking at the answer, even though you've never known the answer before, right? This is not recall. Once you've known the answer once, now you're testing recall. But testing your generation skills is actually a really valuable thing. All right, so now what they want us to do is add a link in the About page. So we're going to go and copy some code into the About page for this nav here. I think the entire header is the same with the exception of the link. So let's go ahead and do that first. Again, we're going to add this funky like empty component thingy around it, which I don't know what that does. Whoops. And there's our header. Why? And I'm also going to delete that content. So they want to change this link. Wait, why do we want the about page to link to the about page? I guess they're going to demonstrate something here, but that seems like this should be a link to home. But hey, you know, I'll play along with whatever little game you're taking me on Redwood tutorial, and see if what they want me to learn from that. And then, okay, they're putting a link to the home here. All right, so link, again, I could copy this, but trying to get it in my fingers. So routes.home. See how badly I need to learn how to type the word routes? I can't even spell it. And then return home. Great. And then I am not going to type all this. Look on my works, ye mighty, and despair. Okay, so refresh, head over to our blog. We're going to click our about page, and something went wrong. All right, clearly I typed something wrong here. Probably. Oh, guess what I forgot? Nope. So, yeah, not a lot of error reporting there on what went wrong. Fortunately, I noticed and was able to quickly come over and fix that. So we've imported the right thing now, and there's the about page, and then I can return home. Great. Cool. All that works. I'm not, yeah, okay, that export was already there. You can go back and forth. Yes, I did gasp in disgust as I copy pasted that code. So we have layouts. Awesome. Man, have any of you used Rails? Because like layouts, it's a super common thing from Rails. Wow. Yeah, this is really handy. This was the way that so layouts, one way to make sure that your headers, that certain things stay consistent across all of your pages is to make a higher level than a page thing called a layout. And in that layout, you can have a whole host of things that stay consistent. And then for every page that you have, it pulls the information from the layout and inserts that first, and then inserts that page there in the middle. So I'm really curious. I'm really familiar with this concept from Rails, like I mentioned. And oh, look, from now on, we'll use the G alias. Love you guys. Completely agree. All right. So now we're going to I'm going to go ahead and commit our about page. Added about page and link to it. Okay, and then we'll go ahead and run our new command here. Oh, I did the thing I said I wasn't going to do. I copy pasted instead of typing it out. Get it in the fingers. Yarn Redwood G, and they want to generate a new type of thing, because remember the first command line argument after generate is the type of the thing we're going to generate. Actually, I'm curious whether I can just do yarn Redwood G and it tells me all the types. Boom, it does. Very cool. Cell, component, layout, page, scaffold, SDL. Interesting. And service. Okay, cool. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what these other concepts represent, but right now they want us to explore the layout concept. I think it's going to be pretty straightforward, so we'll try and hustle through it and get to maybe some more interesting things. So layout blog, what all does that generate for us? It tells us that we now have in the web source directory, let's see, web source layouts, a blog layout. And again, they're following that consistent pattern of appending the type of the thing to the directory, and then the type, and then also the type of the thing to the component's name as well. So that when you're looking at a component, you can say this component's a layout because it's called yada 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 layout. And then this component's a page because it's called yada 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 page. Again, super helpful convention that allows you to kind of more easily navigate the code. Interestingly, the layout also has a default test associated with it, which makes sure that it renders successfully. I guess that makes sense because our layouts may also contain components and arbitrarily complex layout information. So we do want to keep that going. I'm really curious if they have a how to run tests section in the tutorial, but we're not very far through the tutorial yet, so I'll give them some time to get to that. All right, so what do they want us to do with layout? We have created the layout blog, and then the associated test file. We're calling this blog layout because we may have other layouts in the future. All right. Yep, so it wants us to start by removing the header from our layout, or from our components, and moving it up to the layout level. All right, so let's do that. Where's our layout? Return layout children. Why is this? I guess this is a functional stateless component. No, yeah, it is a functional component. Or what did they call it up here? Yeah, it is a function component. It just has an argument. Okay, that's why it looks different to me. Again, not a React expert here. And so this children section is going to be what inserts the stuffs. So we'll probably want to put that in our main, I'm guessing. So let's just type it out. Trying not to look to the right now so that I can get this into my fingers and try to get the answer without having to look. Return that, and then add the closing one. I'm confused why it has the explicit return. I think that's the other thing that looks different to me. Oh, because the other one is on the next. The other one is done this way. That looks a lot cleaner to me. Okay. Return, and I think they generally have a space there. I need to set it prettier so that I'm not manually formatting these files anymore. So put it on my to-do list. Okay, so we now have a blog layout that has the header in it. That means we can take it out of these. We can also take out these mains and just have the content. I love how slim these files get. Oh, it looks like we're still going to need a wrapper here, though. Whoops. Still need a wrapper because we've got two components that are at the same level, the paragraph and the link. And then the home page will just need home. I wonder if I could even return. Yeah, I think, I don't know. I think that'll work. Let's see. Home. Oh, so now we probably are going to need, I haven't scrolled down yet, right? We're probably going to need to have the router use the layout effectively, is my guess what the next step here is. Import blog layout. Oh, you do it. Oh, interesting. Okay, so this is where that empty component thing, it like being sitting over in a route file where I have to go look at it, go look it up. Makes it really explicit. I like that. Blog layout. All right. Something went wrong. Unsurprising. I bet I have to import that file. That's my next guess. Let's see. Import blog layout. Yep, I missed that when I was looking at it. So let's get it in the fingers, right? About page. Import blog layout from source/layouts/blog layout. So this does immediately make me wonder. Oh, I forgot this here. If there's a way to automate that import, but I'll leave that for now. And let's add the import there. And I saw a little blimp over here, still not working. So either I mistyped something, import blog layout from source layouts blog layout. Nope, unless I misspelled something here. It's looking good to me. And then export default Props.children is where the magic will happen. Oh, that's what it is. The blog layout itself has a link in it, and I did not import the link. It's always a missing import. Whoa. Oh, haha. Endless loop. Blog layout references blog layout, which references blog layout, which references blog layout. Let's try that again. And I imagine I'm going to have to refresh here. I might even have blown up the server. We're going to try that again. Stopping the server, restarting it. Does not like endless loops. Yep, that was the problem. Hey, fun way to blow up a Redwood application. Reference the layout in the layout file. I knew, so one thing I should have organized these a little bit better. So this should have been a tip to me. I knew that I had changed 2 different component files to reference blog layout. I thought I had changed home and about. When I went over to about, I hadn't changed it. I was like, oh, that's odd. I remember doing it. Well, I had changed it in the wrong place. So anyway, that was the issue. Looks like everything's working. I can link back and forth. I have the title, the H1 in both places. So everything's looking good there. All right, so props.children is where the magic will happen. So basically this method that gets passed in, the children. Oh, of course. So this function basically, or this component, blog layout, passes in all the arguments here, which then get put out there. Yeah, makes sense. We can remove the import for link and routes from the homepage. Yes, we can. That is a good point. And it looks like it even let me know that I don't need those by graying them out. Thanks, VS Code. You're awesome. All right, so all the things look good here. Note that this import statement uses source /blog layout /blog layouts and not ... Being able to use just source is a convenience feature provided by Redwood. Nice. Very cool. Why are things named the way they are? Some duplication in Redwood's file names. So I already commented on this. I think that is actually fantastic. You'll have dozens. I completely agree. When you have dozens of files open in your editor, it's easy to get lost, and not even, especially when you have several files with same names or similar names. We found that the extra duplication in the name of files is worth the productivity benefit when scanning through your open tabs. I completely agree. Yeah, I love that little aside. I had already noticed that as well, and I think that's going to make, again, this is optimizing for the developer experience, right? Thinking about what is it actually like to be paging through a ton of components and not even know what you're looking at. We'll say, well, this thing is a component that is used as a page. This thing is a component that's used as a layout. Really, really helpful to kind of restore some of the concepts that I think have been missing in single page apps and make them a little bit harder to work on and navigate. Okay, very cool. So we are on to the next step in our tutorial. Let me do a quick commit of the changes we've made so far. Let me do a get status, get add dot, get commit, const blog layout. All that looks good. Changes to that's the blog layout test file, changes to the about page, and changes to the home page. Okay, great. Moved header to layout file. I just instinctively hit git push every time, and there's not a git. I haven't pushed this up to GitHub yet. I should do that real soon, but for now, let's just keep moving. Okay, so then we can remove the extra return to home link. Oh yeah, let's add home. Wait, sorry, one more link. Let's have the title logo link go back to the home page as per usual. Yeah, completely agree. So let's do that in the layout file. Alrighty. Again, let's get it in our fingers by giving us another opportunity to type it here. Link to equals routes dot home. There's that named route home, and then we will bring up that. Oh gosh, there we go. /j. Okay, and then now we can get in the about page. We can get rid of that link, and then we can also get rid of this import. And then everything should be the same in our Redwood blog about. Perfect. Okay, we can remove the getting dynamic. Yes, actual blog post, creating the database schema. This is the moment I've been waiting for. Is how does this interact with the data layer? Because so far we've been mainly in React land in the front end, and the way that Redwood handles routing, which is really clean. But the thing that makes Redwood special is the way that it interacts with the data layer as well and ties all of that together for you in a really developer-friendly environment. So let's see how that works. Let me go ahead and name this moved all links to the nav. Don't hit get push. You don't have a get remote yet. Okay, reminding myself. Okay, so we've only got a few minutes left on our Pomodoro to kind of explore how dynamic data works in Redwood, but I am super excited to do that. So let's dive in. 2 pages are great. For the purpose of the tutorial, we're going to be getting our blog posts from a database. Relational databases are still the workhorses of many complex and not so complex web applications. We've made SQL Access a first-class citizen. It all starts with the schema. We need to decide what data we'll need for a blog post. So ID, title, body, created at, all looks good to me. We use Prisma client.js to talk to the database. Prisma has another library called migrate that lets us update the database's schema in a predictable way. Each change is called a migration. Again, if you're coming from the Rails world like I am, that is incredibly familiar, that we need some sort of schema. And then we also need some sort of migration that lets us, that when we make changes to the schema, we make changes through migration files. Or at least that's what I'm assuming is going to happen here. But it doesn't look like it. It looks like we're going to edit the schema directly. Okay, that makes me uncomfortable. So let's see why that might be a good way to do things. Schema.prisma. Interesting. So I don't have a Prisma add-on. Boom. Back over here. Boom. Man, I love VS Code. Oh, so nice. Okay, great. So we've got our DS data source, which is using SQLite. So probably we're going to want to switch to Postgres at some point. Remind me later. So right now, yeah, I'm not going to do that right now, but at some point we're going to want to switch from SQLite to Postgres and see how this interacts with a real database. But it's totally fine for it to start with SQLite. I do remember the old Rails days when that was the first database that you got out of the box with Rails as well. So Prisma client.js is generator Photon.js. This whole thing sounds magical, and I want to learn more about it in the future. I'm going to leave it alone for now. But generator Photon.js, provider, binary target. Okay, sure. That looks kind of terrifying. I'm going to go ahead and delete their example, and we're going to type in, apparently, the first change to our schema is going to happen by editing the schema directly. They also have migration files, so it makes me wonder why we're making this change directly to the schema. But I'm willing to go along for the ride for a little while and assume that they've thought through this and that there's a good way to do it. So the first thing we're doing is adding an ID column. Every table should have an ID column. In my opinion, it should be called ID, not post ID. I know that there's apparently there's some debate about that. This is like one of those things like, how could you have a different opinion? Yeah, some people do. So it defaults to auto increment. So this is going to take advantage of like the SQL feature of an auto incrementing integer ID column. I'm guessing this at ID. Again, I'm probably looking, this is probably like a Prisma file, given that it's called schema.prisma. I've never used Prisma before. I've worked with as an engineering manager on projects that have used it, but I haven't used it personally on any of my projects that I'm building. So I'm assuming that this is a special thing here. It's basically saying this is the like ID or index of the table, but not exactly sure what it does. You know what? I'm having so much fun exploring the data layer. I'm going to give ourselves 5 more minutes. Again, I try to stick really closely to Pomodoros because I think it's a really healthy thing to do. But I love how Voito Renix Tomato Timer has like a plus 5 minutes in case you want to give yourself a little more time. And in this case, I want 5 more minutes. So I'm going to give ourselves 5 more to play around here. Okay, so title, string, body, string, created at, date, time. This is where prettify would have been really nice. So I don't have to format this myself, but I have not installed it. So I'm going to go add some spaces here to make this nice. Okay, so we now have a post model in the database. So we've got a table in called post. It has an integer ID that auto increments. It has a string. It has a body, and it has a created at that defaults to the current time. Cool, makes sense to me. All that seems pretty normal. You could use a QID or a UID or UUID if you wanted to for the ID. I think it's fine to start with integers. I also agree about the nicer URLs, but totally fine. So that was simple. Now we'll want to snapshot this as a migration. Okay, so maybe that's how we create migration files, is like snapshots of changes to the schema, like making a change and then taking a picture. All right, I'm not familiar with Prisma and like how it actually works. I just the concepts of it. So I'll go along for the ride here, but this seems kind of strange. Why wouldn't I just create a file called migration that created a model called post? Ugh. Okay, so here we go. That was simple. Now you want to do this, say snapshot this as a migration. So let's do that. Yarn Redwood DB save. Creating a database migration. Sure, let's create a new, man, I love command line tools that do this. Like, look at the box around this that's like the right width, and I can just hit up and down, and it like highlights the, I don't know if you can tell because of the screen coloring and everything, but like this is a slightly brighter color, and then when you move away from it, it turns to a slightly dimmer color. Like somebody was paying attention when they were building that. Super cool. Name of migration. All right, so I'm curious. Even more so, I would think, all right, this is setting off my, like, this could be better from a developer experience thing, but something like create posts is perfect. Again, convention over configuration. I would like to not have to think about what to name my migration. If it's adding a table called posts, it should always be called create post or create posts, or like, even down to the pluralization. I would love for it to be specified personally. All right, so it says our new data model is this, which I know because I typed it. And then it just created this migration file, migration steps.json, schema.prisma. Okay, so it's capturing that schema. Use Prisma to migrate up -- experimental. That's terrifying to apply the migration. I guess Prisma 2 is in pre-release, y'all's. So it's definitely definitely like I expected that we would be potentially using an experimental command line. After the command completes, you'll see a new subdirectory created under API Prisma migrations. All right, let's do a git status real quick and see what has changed. So API Prisma migrations. I'll jump over to Visual Studio Code for those of you who are used to looking at it this way. API Prisma migrations. We've got a migration file that's timestamped, so I like that, probably because I'm familiar with it. A README file. Fascinating. So I'm thinking through that and why they might do that. So a lot of times there are reasons why you make certain changes. So especially changing the data model. Changing the data model can kind of be a big deal, and times you need to justify why that change occurs. And encoding that by actually storing a README file at the migration level that allows you to document why you made the changes to the data model that you made. It's kind of powerful. I like that. I like that a lot. Okay, so it gives you a snapshot of the file that we've already typed. So basically just copies that file over. Schema.prisma now exists in here as well. And then it gives me this steps JSON file, which I am not going to look at right now. And let's just keep going with the tutorial. So we'll apply the migration with another command. So all we've done is create the migration so far. This is yarn. Ooh, look at that. RW instead of Redwood. So as I mentioned earlier, I wanted to be able to just use R, but that might be reserved. So we'll go with yarn RW. All right, I know that Pomodoro's yelling at me for not taking my break, so I'm gonna just run this migration, and then we will take a 5-minute break. So yarn RWDB up. Okay, so so this does a couple things. Migrates the database to the next state, and it tells you exactly what data model that will be initialized in the database. It runs through the migrations. One create table statement was run. It tells you it was done. And then it regenerates the Prisma client. And you can now start using it in your code. So this is nice, like a little bit of documentation of like, if you're not familiar with how to use Prisma to get access to the data that you just created, here's some code you can copy in. And then it's got explore the full API here. So a little bit more links to the documentation. Has anything changed in my... No. So no files have changed. Interesting. So yeah, like I mentioned... Oh, wow, no, there's a migrate lock file. I don't remember what this was before because I didn't open it. I think this did change as a result of what we just ran. Okay, so like I mentioned a few minutes ago, data access, like the data layer being generated for you automatically, and creating the GraphQL endpoints that are associated with that data layer is one of the things that makes Redwood really freaking exciting. Is I end up having to write a whole lot less code in order to maintain data on the back end, and it's taking that ORM a little bit further in terms of owning more parts of the stack and linking that up with the API. Again, slightly dangerous. There's like pitfalls to be avoided here, and like potentially entanglement and like exposing too much of your the different parts of your application to one another and making them dependent upon one another. But I think the win for development velocity is probably worth the danger. So this has been fun little exploration of the data model stuff. I'm going to take 5 minutes and we'll have one more Pomodoro where we'll get to keep going through the tutorial and basically see how do we actually write data, read data from the database and write data back to the database. So I will be back in 5 minutes. Let's go ahead and start the break now. And I will switch over to our break screen and I'll see you in 5. Okay, we're back for our last 30 minutes of learning RedwoodJS. I'm going to go ahead and hit start on our timer. Last 25 minutes, our last Pomodoro here. Man, this is super fun. So we are in the middle of the data exploration here. So what we've done so far is we've created a migration file and we've run the migration to basically set up our SQLite database with the table that we expect to have there. We haven't done anything about pulling data from that database or pushing data into that database. And this is where the magic of Redwood and a Redwood-like thing really comes to light, right? Because think about what you have to do now. You've created a table in a database. So normally you have to like wrap that table in some sort of object relational mapper or create some class that like accesses that data and pushes that and saves data and like can write to that data, basically like CRUD operations on the back end. Then you have to create like an API endpoint that allows you to expose those CRUD functions to your front end, and then you have to access that API via the front end. Maybe even store some state around the specific state of that object for your single page app land world thing. And then you need to even write potentially some additional API endpoints that allow you to interact with each one of like create, read, update, delete. Like, whoa, we have so much code to write if we want to just create a post or read a post from the database. And that's where like the front end, back end, single page app thing has been just a total, like, I mean, just it puts so much more work on you. And I think a lot of people coming from like Rails land and stuff have felt that. And have kind of pushed back against it. But React gives you some things that you absolutely need in terms of like having a real front end architecture. And so I'm excited about like this Prisma Apollo kind of knitting the whole thing together in some intelligent way to make it really easy to access data and save data without having to write all the boilerplate code that I just mentioned. So let's go. Creating a post editor, fun. We haven't decided on look and feel, but wouldn't it be amazing if we could play around with posts without having to build a bunch of pages that we'll probably throw away once the design team gets back to us? All right. Lucky for us, amazing is Redwood's middle name. It has no last name. Let's generate everything we need to perform all the CRUD actions on posts so that we can not only verify we've got the right fields in our database, but let us get some sample posts so we can start laying out our pages and see some real content. Word. Redwood has a generator for just this occasion. Yarn Redwood generate scaffold post. Heck yes. This is super cool. Okay, so loving the generators, by the way. We have, what we probably should do first is check in our post migration, add post, create post table, and keep going from there. Funny that they didn't mention the README. I'm curious if they're going to come back to that. I might have just browsed right over it, but I love the idea. I'm curious what their recommended way to use the README that's associated with migration is. All right, so let's keep going. We're going to do yarn, Redwood, generate, scaffold. So now we're generating a new kind of thing called a scaffold, and let's see what that does. I hope it's not what scaffolding was in Rails land. No, I'm just kidding. If you've used Rails scaffolds, there's something that most people agree that you stop using after you become a more experienced developer. So we'll see what scaffold means in Redwood. Let's point the browser to 8910. So generate scaffold post. Let's see what that does. Holy smokes. That's a lot of stuff. And that looks very similar to scaffolds in Rails land. So the reason I say that is because it's generating a layout, pages for each one of create, read, update, delete, right? We've got, just look at this. We've got a new post page, which is create. We've got the posts page, which is the list of posts. We've got the post page, which would be the show action, show me a single post. Edit post, which is going to be update. And then probably got like a link in there that you can click to delete. So you'll have like, there's create, read, update, delete, and you can read as a single post or read as a list of posts. It's also creating a whole bunch of components, which I imagine are embedded in those pages, and it creates the layout for you as well. So as well as a scaffold CSS file, and then your post component, services files. So yeah, Scaffold really is what it is in Rails land. It's basically saying, let me create everything you need to deal with a certain kind of object. My guess is you probably don't want to use Scaffold except for in cases like they specifically mention, right? We haven't decided on this. We want to play around with posts without having to build a bunch of pages. So that's, again, this is probably a great use case for Scaffold, is like playing around with the way that you might do create, read, update, delete. Oh, and look at this fancy styled page too. But yeah, this is probably not something that you're going to want to use after you're building Redwood apps, like after you're pretty far along the build process. Anyway, we'll see. Posts, here we are. So look, we've got a new post button in the top right. Pretty standard layout, right? No posts yet. So this is clearly looking at the posts plural list page for posts. So we can go ahead and click new post. Look at this fancy form, man. So I got this blog post, Redwood, middle name is awesome. It has no last name. Someone should work on that. All right, so we've got a post now that has a title and a body. We're gonna hit save, which is gonna do a create. Okay, so all kinds of stuff is happening right now. So for example, look at all the stuff that's been created in terms of files. It has also modified our routes index.js. Okay. I'm not surprised that it modified routes because it's going to create all of those create, read, update, delete routes. By the way, Rails route files are so freaking nice because like they bundle up a lot of like all of that stuff right there that I just highlighted. They bundle all of that into like a single little tiny DSL. I imagine that's something that we could eventually see in Redwood down the road. But anyway, like I mentioned, there's a list page, there's a view page, there's an edit page, and there's a create new page. So very similar to the pages that you would see in a Rails application. Okay, and then the other thing I wanted to pull up over here is our fancy little the server that's running and see what kind of output when we actually get to click this save button. So right now we can see that we're doing a post to GraphQL. That's interesting. We haven't done anything yet. I'm a little bit surprised to see a post here to the /GraphQL endpoint. It's reading from our GraphQL endpoint, but even the fact that it's a post command is throwing me off a little bit here. Don't know a whole lot about the way that like Redwood's front end and the GraphQL backend like responds to web requests, but that's something I'm gonna want to like bookmark as something to come back to and make sure that I understand. But let's go ahead and hit save. Boom. Unsurprisingly, on the front end, we have a list page for posts that has a post in it now with a title, a body, a created at, a show, edit, and there's the delete button that I predicted we would have that gives us like full CRUD access. Super cool, and I'm really curious what's going on there. And we have two posts that happen. Okay. So that first post to GraphQL was actually pulling back the list of posts when we first loaded the /post route. So turns out there weren't any at the time, but there is now one. So this first post right here would be a create post. I'd love to see a little bit more output here. This is like a little baffling that I can't see what's actually happening under the hood. I'd love to be able to see like things happening to the database. I'd love to be able to see like what's being returned to the front end. So maybe a little bit more output here would be something I'd be looking for. Similarly, this post is the show me the list of posts that have been created. I do like having the MS here, like how long this took 191 seconds to get back a list of posts, or 191 milliseconds. Like we're already above the ideal 100 millisecond response time. Kind of interesting. Tiny little data set of one column in our database. So there's a lot going on here that's like powering this. Okay, so back to the tutorial. Well, that's barely more than we got when generated page, which happened. We call new post, we click it, we click save, it creates. Did we just create a post in the database? Oh yeah, we did. And then show that post here on this page. Yes, we did. Try creating another. Scaffold is amazing for tutorials. But let's be honest, like there's a lot of code that the Scaffold just generated that we have no idea what it did. I mean, like none of this, none of this is particularly surprising, right? If we click show, we get the detail. If we click edit, we get an edit page. And if I click save, it takes me back to the list page. I can click show again. It made the save to the database. Super cool. I can delete. I'm not going to delete just in case I want to mess with that new post again. All that's great. So Redwood just created all the pages, components, and services necessary to perform all the CRUD actions. No need to open a database GUI or log in through a terminal window to write SQL from scratch. Redwood calls these things scaffolds. Okay, so I'm very curious about this bulleted list. Here's what happens when Scaffold runs. Again, I was talking about just a few seconds ago that one of the things that makes Redwood magical and frameworks like this is that there's a lot less code that has to be written to interact with the database layer than in sort of typical, than in a React app where you're writing your node and Express layer. But there's still a lot of code here. And so I'm going to want to make sure that we understand what's going on all these different pages and understand what it actually takes to make sort of a minimal change to the database layer, or like submit something to the database and to read things from the database. So I'm looking forward to going through here and figuring this out. So it added an SDL file to define several GraphQL queries and mutations. So let's go look at that first. Posts SDL.ds. All right, so this exports a schema object that's wrapped in this GQL function. This looks pretty familiar, right? We've got our type post. This should be probably pulling from the Prisma data model that we've already created. I would think you would want. So my immediate reaction when I'm looking at this is, this file should be generated. I should never ever edit this file because as I'm making changes to the data model through migrations and stuff like that, like it should automatically keep my SDL up to date. That's my instinct. I don't know if that instinct's right. I have not maintained a GraphQL API in production with thousands of users interacting with it. I haven't thought a whole lot about GraphQL API design. So it could be that like this is where you do your API design. Like this is where you design the types that are accessible via your GraphQL API. This is where you define your mutations, which is like how you actually make a change to one of the basically the tables in your database. So I don't know. I'm in new territory here. Like again, not a GraphQL expert. So maybe my initial instinct that this is a generated file only and shouldn't be edited is wrong. But let's keep going. And you can kind of see. I just want to point out a couple other things. This is an exact representation of the schema that we had, right? Schema.prisma. Here's our model, post, ID, title, body created at, and then here's our post SDL, ID, title, body created at. This type query is allowing us to return one or many posts. Very useful to be able to like fetch one, fetch them all. This input is basically saying these are the two things that. This is fascinating. So this is basically saying these are the things that the user will submit. These are basically the parameters that are illegal to submit to the database. Like which columns will the user actually interact with? Now notice one thing: ID, not at all surprising, right? That it's not in the input post input. But we're like harkening back to that idea of convention over configuration. Notice what else is not in the input. Created at. Where did we tell it to not put created at in the input? Answer: we didn't. It does have a default value, but I don't think it's the default value that's removing it from the input. In fact, the default value should be able to be overridden, right? Like you should be able to set a default value here too, right? Of default, like new post, right? That should be a perfectly valid argument. So that's not where we're doing it. This is an example of Redwood being smart and saying, you don't want your user to be mucking with your created at column. So that's kind of interesting. Which begs the question of why is it even specified here? Why is it not specified automatically? I guess that's for the sake of explicitness. Again, these are trade-offs that you make, right? Between being explicit and then also having things that are by convention done that way. So anyway, the scaffold detected that created at shouldn't be used. It didn't add it to the input. Here's the type mutation. Notice that create post takes the post input parameters, not all of these parameters. Although, again, I'm not a GraphQL expert, so I'm not familiar with what this means exactly, that this is input versus a type. But anyway, notice the mutations. We want to be able to create a new post. We want to be able to update a post, and we want to be able to delete a post. So here's your read in in this query, and then here's your create, your C, your U, and your D from CRUD. So cool. The SDL does a lot for you. The question else is also like, how does this interact with Prisma and your GraphQL layer to make all these things accessible? So I've got more learning to do there, certainly. Added a services file in API source services post.js that makes the photon. I have to say photon that way. I read it that way. Photon calls to get data in and out of the database. I mean, somebody was having fun with that when they named those calls to the database, in and out of the database, photons. Must have been a physicist. All right, export const posts, return db.post.find many. So they just get all of the posts from the database. Here's get one post from the database. Here's create it in the database. Am I gonna have to write all this stuff? Like, again, I look at this and I'm like, shouldn't this be generated? Like, I mean, I know it was generated using our scaffold, but again, back to my earlier point about scaffolds, I would assume that scaffolds are something that you only use. Again, you shouldn't have to like keep this stuff up to date. I would think. Again, this is where that, magic versus being explicit. There's always trade-offs there when you're designing a framework. So it also creates several pages. I'm expecting these pages to be a lot more familiar than everything I've looked at so far, because we've been playing around in React land for a little bit here. Let's see. So it imports a post layout. Oh, interesting. That's also like a... Okay, now that's using the layout file. So let's see what the post layout. I imagine that's just like a header. Ugh. What? RW scaffold. This looks like using a div to apply some styles. That makes me distinctly uncomfortable. Interesting. So we've got some CSS action going on here. PYPX, justify between. So they're applying a bunch of styles through classes, which is fine. Very bootstrappy. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to go look and see how they handle styling. I'm going to leave that alone for now. And this might be using like styled components or something that I'm not as familiar with. Again, like React and CSS I've been using React. My last professional experience was using React Native, which had a different styling approach than React applications have. So I got some learning to do with that stuff. So our post layout basically allows us to go back and forth between like the list view and the various pages. If I'm reading this like header correctly, and then it puts the body of the page out in that props.children. Again, we're familiar with this from all 60 minutes ago where we learned about it. Let's look at, so that's the post layout file. Let's go back to post page, because that's going to be reading, or actually let's do the posts page. It's going to be reading a list of all posts. Ooh, cells. Created 3 cells. Interesting. And if you remember from like the very beginning of today's like exploration, cells was the thing that they talked about that ties together the sequence of actions that happens from the front end all the way to the database layer and back through the API and all that kind of stuff. So we need to go learn about cells for sure. So just like an interesting note here, the scaffold was really helpful in letting us very quickly create a bunch of pages. But at the same time, in terms of like me learning Redwood, Scaffold exposed me to a ton of concepts all at the same time. And I realized that I'm doing the generation approach, right? Of like trying to understand what the thing is before actually reading about what the thing is. I could just keep reading in the tutorial and I'm sure that they would explain what the SDL file is, what services are, what the cells are, and then components is going to be more or less obvious, I think, just based on my relative familiarity with React. But yeah, I'm now almost at the point of saturation of like new ideas of services, SDLs, and the cells. Those three things together kind of blowing my mind right now, which is probably good that I have a break coming up in about 10 minutes. All right, so you'll notice that some of the generated parts have plural names and some have singular. This convention is borrowed from Ruby on Rails, which uses a more human naming convention. This is something, I'm not going to read this out loud. It's something I'm very familiar with from Ruby on Rails, and I think I might have even mentioned the singular versus plural earlier in this call, earlier on this walkthrough here. As far as the generators are concerned, services are always plural. All right, it's good to know. I do want to know what these conventions are, though. Service file names are always plural. Let me pull up our little directory here. Go to the top, close API, open source, services, posts, posts.js. Ooh, a test file. It's a null test here, or a test that always returns true. So they want you to fill this in. This is also something we used to do in Rails as well. Like the scaffolds would also create test files for the different objects, but the tests were nothing. Like they didn't do anything. And you needed to actually make sure to not check these in because they just slow your test suite down and they give you a false sense that you're doing testing when you're not actually testing anything other than true is true. So yeah, sorry. Services are plural. SDL file names are plural. The methods in the services will be singular or plural depending on if they're expected to return multiple or a single post. So I think I commented on this when I was reading this file, that like there's a posts plural and a post function that returns either one or many. Pages that come with the scaffolds are plural or singular depending on whether they deal with one or many posts. Again, the posts page is the list page. The post page singular is the show a single post. Layouts use the name you give them on the command line. Components and cells like pages. So in other words, we don't recommend layouts as being singular or plural. It's up to you. Components and cells like pages will be plural or singular depending on context when created by the scaffold generator. Otherwise, it's a little hand wavy. Context when created by the scaffold generator. Okay. Also note that it's not the database table name that's plural, singular, or plural. It's the database table name part that is singular or plural, not the whole word. So it's posts cell, not post cells. Got it. If you don't have to follow this convention once you start creating your own apps, but we recommend doing so. We have come to love that nomenclature. Give it 5 minutes. Great. I can give it more than 5. Thanks, guys. All right, creating a home page. We can start replacing these pages one by one as we get designs, or maybe move them to the admin section of our site. So this is actually a great, I'm glad they called this out, because scaffolds can be really helpful in creating an admin UI that gives you CRUD access to your data rather than exposing direct access to your data. Because a lot of times you do have an admin data set or data. You haven't, sorry, an admin user group that needs to be able to directly manipulate the data in the application. And a lot of times it takes some time to actually get that UI that's vital for them to do their job available. Yeah, the public-facing site won't let viewers create, edit, or delete posts. What can they do? They can view a list of posts. They can view a single post. All right, we already have a home page, so we don't need to create that. We want to display a list of posts to the user, so they don't need to add that logic. Whew. Yep, and then this paragraph is basically what happens when things go wrong. Loading screens, error pages, blank slate messages. Yeah, these are super important for like basic application design that creates a delightful user experience. So I'm glad that they're already talking about how to handle those and they're thinking about them, because a lot of times we as developers don't give enough attention to things like blank slate design and error states and loading states and things like that. And it makes our applications a lot more user unfriendly. So Oh boy, cells. Okay, so I'm very interested in learning more about cells, but we are now very close to the end of our time. In fact, there it is. That is the end of our time. Whew! Okay, so that was a 2-hour whirlwind introduction to RedwoodJS. Next time that I'm playing with Redwood, I'm going to start exploring the cells concept, which, as I mentioned at the beginning, is one of the things I'm most excited about. The loop from the front end back to the database and back to the front end. And right now, I'm definitely stopping right now with like a little bit of, as I mentioned, like almost overwhelmed by several different new concepts coming at me at the same time and not being able to reconcile those. So I'm excited to kind of go back through RedwoodJS and give this another go, and starting with the cells concept, try to understand how the data access layer all works together, especially these different states that we were just talking about: loading, empty, failure, error. So you can kind of see we made it probably a quarter of the way through the tutorial. I'm excited to go through the rest of it at a later time. How Redwood works with data. Sounds like I'm really impressed with the documentation. There's a lot here that's making it easy for us to get started. I think that the Redwood team should be proud of the work that they've done to set up a great development experience for people that are first time coming to it. The docs have been fantastic. So yeah, that was. Thanks for joining for Coding with Jess, learning a new web framework on the fly. I hope that this gave you a sense of like learning is sort of an essential part of every developer's working life, from the time that they are just getting into development to the time that they're a senior developer. You're always going to be learning new things. You're always going to be exposed to new concepts, new frameworks, new programming languages throughout your career. Learning isn't something to be afraid of. It is something that is hard. Like, you actually have to expend effort onto it. There are better ways of learning. There are worse ways of learning. So learning how you personally learn effectively is an incredibly valuable tool for you as a developer and will serve you throughout your career. So this has been really fun. Thanks to the RedwoodJS team for putting together such a great framework. I'm excited to see what other applications I can use this framework for in the next few weeks and months, and excited to see where the framework itself goes. And I've had a ton of fun. Thanks for those, for Luis and others who stopped by today, Matt and Lewis. And yeah, we'll do this again next Thursday as well. I don't know if it'll be Redwood. I don't know if I'll be back to working on Spotify new releases, but thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next time.